Right. Welcome, viewers. You're watching NDTV's special coverage of the G7 summit. I'm Gauri Dwivedi, and Deepthi and I are going to be taking you through all the latest updates of the G7 summit. Prime Minister Modi has arrived there, and on your screens are those live images and visuals coming in. On your screens right now is the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and he seems to be in deep conversation with the European Council President Ursula von der Leyen.
Oh yes, and I'm wondering what are these conversations really centered around right now, Gauri, and I think you should be able to tell us this. We talk about a lot of energy solutions, climate change, all these things that are real. Then there is trade, there is tariff, there is multilateralism. People talk about just one world, common interest. But when you look at all these leaders sitting across, talking to each other, what really weighs on their minds, especially at a point where you've seen Donald Trump, Gauri, just moving out of that G summit rather very quickly. He lands in Washington, he rushes to the White House. In the Situation Room, he's having a conversation right now. And obviously, the world wants to know what will he do next on Israel and Iran. But what about the G7?
Indeed, on one end, everyone is waiting for the update that will come in from the Trump administration in terms of what will be the big American decision on Iran and Israel. But the visuals on your screens, Deepthi, you have the French president talking. He was also had a verbal spat a short while back. Not a spat, so to say, but he was being corrected by Donald Trump. And frankly, going into this summit, there was a lot of expectation that the divisions in the West may probably come out in the front even more, simply because it was looking like Trump against all. Well, frankly, that isn't now going to be a spectacle that we will be seeing simply because Donald Trump made an early exit. But it also puts into question that some of the discussions and deliberations that this summit is supposed to take place, whether it's on climate finance, whether it's on energy, whether it's on the roadmap with regard to how to address wars and conflicts in 21st century, and also the fact how do you address aggressors like Russia when you have Donald Trump actually making a case that Russia should be back in G7 to make it G8. So in the backdrop of those important set of developments coming in, it will be very interesting to see what will be the actual outcome of this summit.
Oh yes, and this is the group of 7, that is G7 that we are talking about, an informal grouping of the world's most advanced economies. Which really are these economies? It is France, the US, the UK, Germany, Japan, Italy and Canada, and the European Union. Its members, remember, meet annually at the G7 summit. The idea is to discuss global economic and geopolitical issues. And this is where, Gauri, India also comes into the picture. India, that is already the 5th largest economy in the world, has regularly been invited to this outreach session of the G7 summit in the past few years. And India and its growing heft is again something that cannot be ignored at the high table. And you were telling us more about those reasons, those numbers, Gauri.
Absolutely, Deepthi. And as we speak, India has actually climbed to be the 4th largest economy. And as I said, it's the world's biggest growth engine. So how can this grouping of the 7 most industrialized countries on the planet not have the world's growth engine being part of it to decide and discuss the future roadmap? Also, India as the voice of the global south. When India speaks, it's not just speaking about itself, it's speaking for the global south, which is 3/4 of humanity. Let's not forget, India has been pushing and championing the cause of developing and least developed countries. And let me in fact rope in both Sanjay Ruparelia, who's joining us, as well as Tara Kartha to talk more about what could be the kind of expectations that both of you have with regard to the G7. It's unlikely to have the fireworks that many thought it would have, with Donald Trump coming face to face with his Western allies in the backdrop of all that he has said, including with the host country himself. But that is unlikely to take place. But it's happening in the backdrop of war clouds that are threatening to overshadow the entire summit's agenda. Tara Kartha, let me start with you. How much do you think this G7 is now going to be focused solely on the Iran-Israel conflict that is becoming bigger as we speak?
I don't see how they can possibly put that aside. I mean, that's not just a moral imperative. We're not talking morals here. We're talking of, this is an economic grouping, right? So the Europe, as a percentage of GDP in the G7 countries, Europe's share has dropped hugely. The G7 as a whole, in terms of their GDP, has dropped. I think it's about 45% of the world economy. Earlier, it was some 60%. So war has an economic impact. And so does the Ukraine war. Of course, the Ukraine war is going on at the same time. So the necessity of getting this terrible war to stop is going to be one. Number two is how to get, well, to get the whole US, the whole tariff structures which are going on, the war. There is a virtual trade war which is going on. That is going to be a problem, given this background of higher defense spending by all these countries. I think that the figure which they gave is 17% jump in defense spending in European countries, including Russia. That's the largest since the Cold War. So how are you going to balance all of this? You've got war, you've got a slowing economy, and you've got rising defense expenditures. Mm-hmm. So that's, I think, where we come in. We've got, hopefully, thank God, this kind of problems will affect us as an economy. You cannot divorce yourself from the world economy. And I think with the Prime Minister, it has always been, from the time he came, the economy is his central point. And let's see how that works within this clique.
Okay. I think Tara makes a lot of important points. And I'm just looking at a lot of these accounts of Donald Trump on the social media also. I think we also do see Kathleen, who's an immigration expert, joining us. Kathleen, also thank you to you for your time. Sanjay, Donald Trump a little while earlier has put out a tweet that says unconditional surrender. Clearly as you're looking at the G7 right now meeting, in deep conversations, looking at how else you can fix the geopolitical situation and much more. But we cannot take away from the fact that you have to look at a resolution to what's been happening between Iran and Israel. And Donald Trump not being a part of the G7 tonight, do you think that possibly could derail that conversation, or it's going to be business as usual?
Well, that certainly dominated the conversation unexpectedly since Israel launched that attack. And I think we've seen from the Trump administration and has sided with Netanyahu's government for quite some time, preceding his re-election in January and since then. So I think that's going to dominate it. And the statement that's been issued so far has been quite muted. It's asked for de-escalation. So it doesn't mention who began this attack. It calls out Iran as the main source of regional instability. This is the perspective of the G7. And then it ends on a note, as your previous speaker was talking about, which is the concern over the impact on the price of oil. 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil trade goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And in previous instances, Iran has been able to crimp that movement. And so I think that's been the main concern. All of these countries are battling concerns around inflation, cost of living. It's one of the main reasons why Prime Minister Carney focused on the economy in particular in this G7 meeting. And we see that in terms of the invitees that he made beyond the G7.
Indeed, that is also the NATO Secretary General who's there on the screens. Let's take some of those, continue to take those visuals full frame as we wait for some of the other leaders to also join in. Formal photo ops will also take place. Viewers, if you're tuning in right now, what you're seeing on your screens are live visuals that are coming in from Canada, where the 50th G7 summit is being held. On your screens is UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer in conversation with the European Council President Ursula von der Leyen, as well as the NATO Secretary General as well. They are, of course, talking about the war clouds that are hovering. Also, the fact that they were hoping that Russia-Ukraine conflict could be on the agenda, but that's unlikely to be, because Donald Trump feels that Russia should be, in fact, part of this grouping, and it should go back to being G8, which it was till 2014, and also B, because, Israel-Iran is the larger conflict that needs to be addressed. And Diti, that's really the big thing, right? I mean, while we talk about that some of the summit outcomes may be not as significant as one would have ideally hoped it to be, but at the end of the day, this is a grouping that is set to decide the roadmap that the world should take, especially of a conflict as significant as Iran-Israel. And as some of the panelists were pointing out, it could have a deep impact on the supply lines and sea routes for the world.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And because we've promised our viewers that we are going to keep our eyes focused not just on what's been happening as far as G7 is concerned and these live images, but also on the latest vis-a-vis Iran and Israel situation. We are learning of a massive blast that has hit western Tehran, and also the Iranian defense system has been activated to intercept Israeli attacks. All this happening as you have Donald Trump in the White House in the Situation Room. So we are live and breaking on both those stories, both those images already up on your screens. I want to also get in a quick word with Kathleen, who hasn't spoken yet. Kathleen, in the light of whatever's been going on, when you talk about Donald Trump, immigration again is one of the core issues that he does speak about. You see a lot of action. You know, different world capitals have different opinions on how to deal with this issue. What, in your sense, possibly could be a point of convergence as far as all these growing economies are concerned?
Well, I would say this is going to be a positive, a positive wave in the immigration industry, wherein we are able to do the conversions now. And as soon as the new PM, the new Prime Minister came in charge of Canada, we were able to convert more people towards Canada, wherein all these people, all these chunk of people, they were wanted to migrate to Australia and Germany and via Europe. But now, as we see, they have introduced new policies, 19C bill. There is a new introduction of a postgraduate work permit. Now people are really happy. And of course, since India is a cornerstone of talent, and we do have a lot of people filled with talent, especially techies, healthcare. And that is the reason we have a wider road to get through our permanent residencies and also get through immigration as very smoothly.
Absolutely.
So, this is absolutely a positive wave for us.
Indeed, Kathleen, and you know, immigration as such is likely to be a big issue simply because you have this rising tide of right-wing thought that is sweeping most of Europe right now, where they feel, in fact, even Keir Starmer has come out with some very strong, stringent views and visa norms that have a huge impact on immigrants, including Indians that have been impacted, whether it's the students or several other immigrant categories have been deeply impacted. So remains to be seen if there is any direction or view that's coming in on that front as well. We have to take a very short break, viewers. We come back with our big focus, big coverage on the G7 summit, where Prime Minister Modi is there. It's a short 23-hour summit. First time he's in Canada in 10 years. This is a visit that will reboot the India-Canada relationship. We're going to come back and talk more on that. Stay with us.
Welcome back. So this is a special non-stop rolling coverage on the all-important G7 that's just going to get kick-started. On your screen are multiple live images that we are getting in as far as the summit is concerned, and a lot of world leaders right now also looking at the other situation that is developing. What's happening between Iran and Israel? You have Donald Trump, who decides to exit the G7 suddenly. He lands up back on his home turf. He's in the Situation Room, and we'll keep getting you all those updates. But for the moment, I want to take it across to our colleague Gauri, who will tell us what is expected. What are the important bilaterals, Gauri, that we are looking at? It's going to be a power-packed day there, and the Prime Minister spending about 23 hours. But every moment, I think, of that time is devoted to a lot of these important conversations.
Absolutely, Deepthi. There are about 4 or 5 very important bilaterals that are scheduled that will take place between Prime Minister Modi and several of the other world leaders. And I want to quickly take our viewers through what exactly is it that are lined up. First, of course, the most important bilateral that is set to take place is with the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney. It is going to be the last, but it is going to be the most important. This is going to act as a possible thaw in the ties between India and Canada that were in deep freeze during Justin Trudeau's tenure. People-to-people ties are likely to get a big boost, because that will happen when the PMs, Prime Minister Modi and his Canadian counterpart, are going to meet for the first time. So there's going to be some sort of a rapport building that will take place between the two leaders, and that's when the ties will really move ahead, because let's not forget they also have a common interest, and that is trade. Economic ties are going to be in focus. Mark Carney may be a political newcomer, but he he's someone who's spent a lifetime in finance and banking, so he understands the importance of trade ties right now, more so at a time when Donald Trump's tariffs have really threatened and upended the entire global economic order. Both India and Canada have shared economic interests, and they would like to put that forward more so with the meeting. And just before we move ahead, I want to quickly tell our viewers the kind of trade ties that exist between them, which is upwards of about $9 billion. Let's move ahead. This is an important meeting as well. Prime Minister Modi will be meeting Giorgia Meloni of Italy, the Italian Prime Minister. The focus will be on trade as well as specific collaboration with regard to space and technology, areas where they have already identified the last time they met at the last multilateral summit. And there will also be a lot of focus on IMEC. The India, Middle East, Europe corridor is something that India is very ambitious about, and Italy joins it on that. So that's another area that will be extremely important. Let's move ahead to the other bilateral that will be extremely important, which is Germany. This is going to be the first meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Chancellor Merz, and they will look to build on the kind of business ties that India and Germany have. Trade is a very important pillar on which the bilateral relationship stands. Indo-Pacific cooperation is the other, where both leaders would like to further build on it. And lastly, Ukraine. That's the fourth other important bilateral. Focus will be on the humanitarian support that India is going to continue to offer to Ukraine. And secondly, Prime Minister Modi is likely to reiterate India's continued balanced position when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war. In addition to this, there is also a possibility of a bilateral with the Mexican president, who's another invitee to the G7 summit. If that happens, that will be the fifth and equally important bilateral that will take place today. Deepthi.
All right, significant details there that Gauri has been able to share with us. And like they say, when it comes to the world stage, every country will have its own interest. Every country needs to ensure that back home they are able to sell a perception that, yes, we are thinking about you. But when it comes to broader issues, whether it's about trade, it's about tariff, it is about climate change and a lot of other things, remember, this is where you see a lot of convergence on world powers. For the moment, I want to take it back to Sanjay, to Tara Kartha and to Kathleen, who've been patient enough as they've stayed with us in that coverage. Tara, to you. Simultaneously, you're looking at this evolving situation between Israel and Iran. When it came to Russia and Ukraine, India was unequivocal. India said that this is not the era of war. Even right now, India has some fantastic relationships with both Israel and Iran, whether it is about economy, whether it is military, whether it's even cultural relations. So at a point like this, I think the Prime Minister will also be looking at what happens and what could Donald Trump do, perhaps in the next few days to the next few weeks.
Well, I just saw this flashing on your screen that Trump has said no to assassinating Khomeini, which is a relief, right? I mean, that's not the way you want to go. Hopefully, it's not going to happen. But what's complicating our position on Iran is the fact that there are Chinese aircraft arriving in Tehran. There is a very clear China. There is that new railroad, the rail link has just been launched some time back. The first cargo has arrived. So that link is probably going to complicate how we're going to play this, though our friendship on a bilateral basis, we have very, very good relations with Iran. But like I said, Gauri, what I was trying to say is, when you're talking of this whole rise of right wing, this whole trend is driven when the world economy starts shrinking, when there is an immense amount of stress on it. And that is where we are going to focus as a leader of the global south. Because inevitably, the costs of war are the highest on the global south. And this, by the way, is incidentally, just off the cuff, is also a concern of China. They don't want you to be seen as a leader of this. And so they are going to be watching what you do at the G7 with a magnifying glass. I think last year they were even looked at where Mr. Modi was standing in photographs. They go to that extent. So the importance of this in terms of how things are going to play out in Asia is very important.
And I want to now quickly turn attention to some of those bilaterals and most importantly the one between Prime Minister Modi and PM Mark Carney. And Sanjay Ruparelia, let me ask you this, that in terms of expectations for this visit, there are a lot of expectations. It will be the first meeting between the two prime ministers. They're looking to start afresh, so to say, ensure that there is a thaw in their relations, build a certain rapport. That's the kind of expectation. How do you see that meeting? What would be your takeaways? What is it that you would expect from this bilateral visit and bilateral meeting?
Well, I think, as you said, it's the beginning of a reset. The Indo-Canadian relations have been in a crisis and an impasse for the last 2 years. And so there's going to be sort of two sets of issues. One is to bilaterally, I don't think we'll have any statement on that, but to look at the dispute that has caused this impasse. And there's an ongoing police investigation into these disputes to do with events that have happened. And then there's a question about trying to expand trade and defense cooperation, looking at critical minerals, for instance, and so on. So I think what we're seeing is a sort of two-track process. Prime Minister Carney did receive a lot of protests by certain members in civil society, Sikh organizations, the NDP itself, some members of his own party. But he is very much a pragmatist when it comes to being prime minister, as he said, and the watchword has been the economy. So I think they're going to try to reset this. They understand how important the relationship is for both countries, certainly for Canada. We were mentioning Indian students earlier. Indian students are the largest segment of the international student body in Canada. There have been caps imposed in the last couple of years for various reasons. But I can see that, that the people-to-people ties have been very important. So I think it was a contentious invitation. It was a last-minute one that came through. But as the Prime Minister here said, it was inevitable because of the size and scope and importance of India in the global economy. And there's a real attempt to see if we can reset that relationship. So I think that's the background.
Thing that Mark Carney will have to address, which is the Khalistani terrorists and Khalistani terrorism that continue to exist on Canadian soil.
But, Gauri, would it be fair to say that these are, rather distractions? Because at the end of this, India time and again has made it very, very clear that these are our red lines. And Tara, you would also agree, so would Sanjay and Kathleen, that these are red lines that India has stuck to. We do not care about who's ruling Canada. We are more concerned about issues that affect us. And, you cannot let that Khalistani terrorism perhaps emanate from your soil, believe that it can give you cushion for power, and we've seen how that entire story has actually collapsed.
Yes.
But Kathleen, why don't you come in on the point not just of immigration, but the fact that for the longest time, a lot of people in Delhi and elsewhere actually viewed the G7 and a lot of these European powers also as a monolith. Now, a lot of things have changed as far as then and now are concerned, and you're looking at India obviously gaining its heft, and India today will be speaking from a position of authority.
Yes, I mean, after what has happened in the past in Ontario with our Indian students, most of the Indian students and the immigrants, the skilled workers, were routed towards Europe and Australia. Being an immigration expert, because we do the filing and we know that how people are coming, and they were hesitant to go ahead with Canada, even if they were fully eligible, and the points, whatever the point system was as per the Canadian immigration laws and regulation, even though they were eligible, they were taking their applications back. But now this is a positive wave, and now I'm using it for my clients as well. And I would say that it is easier to convert these people, because with a very heavy heart, these people used to take an option, Germany or any country in the Europe or Australia. But having said that, they have their own community there in Canada. They have their distant relative already staying there. Knowing the fact that this is going to happen with them in the longer run, that is the reason they, people, the Indian families, they try and say, Kathleen, we would like to route ourselves to other countries, not Canada. But now, as we say that, we do not have anything to do with the new PM, but we really say that when we are not in the favor of Khalistanis and we're not in the favor of terrorism.
Right.
Already we have proven
Right.
with
In fact,
operations
Kathleen,
in
stay with us. Stay with us. I'm going to slip into a very short break and come back and talk more on this Khalistani terrorism issue, something that deeply impacted the India-Canada ties. The onus lies now on Mark Carney to fix it. How he will do, we'll come back and talk more on that. Stay with us. Welcome viewers, you're watching our rolling coverage of the G7 summit. Prime Minister Modi is at the G7 summit. This is the 50th summit of the G7 grouping taking place in Canada, where the PM is there for 23 hours. His first visit in a decade comes at a time when there's expectation of a thaw in relationships. He is going to also be meeting several leaders in quick bilaterals, Deepthi, and that is likely to take place soon. Some of that has already begun, is what we are getting to know. And we have those live visuals that are coming in. Let's put that out as well, of the leaders attending some of these meetings ahead of the G7 summit that will begin in about, the leadership summit that will begin in about an hour from now. Deepthi, some updates, some details that are trickling in as we speak.
Oh, yeah. So, we must tell our viewers, Gauri, and you can actually push that point a little further. A lot of these are scheduled visits, but then you also have a lot of these pull-aside conversations that happen, because this is important when you have world leaders meeting, and at a time like this where you're looking at a lot of global changes happening, there are a lot of power dynamics that are under play. Then you have a Donald Trump, and we have to talk about Donald Trump because he's someone who decided to quickly exit the G7 earlier. As we speak, we also do know that there is a briefing expected from the White House very, very shortly. There has been a meeting in the Situation Room. So we are keeping you abreast also of that important story that is developing parallelly. And on your screens are images of earlier where you had seen Donald Trump landing in Washington, and he's been active on his social media, Gauri, and he's speaking of a quote-unquote an unconditional surrender. So that really tells you where this tone and tenor is taking us. And I'm sure all these world leaders who are right now at the G7 obviously are going to be speaking about this.
Absolutely.
There are those world powers who stand with Iran, those with Israel, but no one wants an escalation for sure, Gauri.
Absolutely. G7 summit taking place in the backdrop of the war clouds. And as Deepthi was pointing out, the reason why Donald Trump went back early, he's holding meeting with his senior advisors. And what's flashing, viewers, at the bottom of your screens right now is the first pull aside that has taken place between Prime Minister Modi and the Mexican president. Pull aside is a more unstructured meeting as compared to a formal bilateral meeting that takes place. A pull aside allows leaders to be able to discuss several issues in a more free manner. Of course, talking points and topics are discussed and shared much in advance. Ambassador D.P. Srivastava also joins us on the broadcast. As we speak, first pull aside has taken place between Prime Minister Modi and the Mexican president. It's important since this comes at a time, Ambassador Srivastava, there's been an expectation that while Trump tariffs may not dominate the G7 summit this time around because there are war clouds, but the fact is trade has been a major issue that is likely to bind some of these leaders that are coming together and is likely to dominate the conversation between Prime Minister Modi and the Mexican president.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. Tariff issue has plagued much of the G7 as well as major economies like India. And Mexico and India have similar positions. Mexico, in fact, was closer to US. It was, they had a free trade agreement. In our case, we didn't have a free trade agreement, but we have very close political relations. And I think this bilateral meeting will help better understanding of each other's position as well as how we go forward, because individual deals with different countries cannot be substitute for a multilateral system.
All right, let's quickly rope in Maha as well on this. Maha, as we speak, pull asides are taking place. One with the Mexican president has taken place, Claudia Sheinbaum, and the second one with the South Korean president is also underway. Talk us through what could be some of the highlights of these pull aside conversations.
Well, these pull asides certainly important considering that these are the countries which are critical at the moment as far as the issues related to tariffs and trade is concerned, Gauri. As you know, Mexico too is suffering at the hands of President Trump with serious tariff and trade issues. At this moment, at this juncture, for countries to align or realign countries to realign with other trading partners certainly becomes an important issue. And in that context, India's meetings, even pull-aside meetings with countries like Mexico and South Korea become very significant and important. But Gauri, as we pointed out, the biggest bilateral meetings, or the most important ones, most significant ones will come a little later in the day, when the Prime Minister sits down for a structured meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. That is the last one of the day today. And before that, President Zelensky as well, where he'd be talking about the ongoing conflict, of course, that continues in Ukraine. Apart from that, the issue of the geopolitical tensions that are only growing from Russia to Ukraine. Now we are looking at the flaring up of the situation in West Asia. All these are critical issues and they will be touched upon in these meetings because they have a ripple effect, not just on the geopolitical situation and tension, but also a ripple effect on trade, economics, and the global economy that has suffered a jolt only 5 years ago during the COVID-19 pandemic. And now this geopolitical situation around the world makes it difficult for countries to recover from the losses of COVID-19 pandemic. These are some of the highlights at the moment. The morning photo session, the family photo session of the invited leaders with the G7 countries is over. But Gauri, as you and Deepti have been discussing, the big issue really for the G7 at the moment remains the Israel-Iran conflict, which is only threatening to escalate further.
Oh, yes. I think Maha also underscores a lot of these important points. Kathleen continues to stay with us, and we also do have Ambassador Srivastava. But I want to get in another quick word with Maha before we go back to our team of guests. And we must tell our viewers that a lot of the breaking updates, remember, are already flashing on your screens. You know, Maha, if I'm not wrong, South Korea again is one country that was touched by the entire diplomatic effort that India unleashed after Operation Sindoor. And this is the Prime Minister's very first big appearance at the G7 post that Operation Sindoor, where India has drawn its own red lines when it comes to terror. And that, I think, is equally significant and worth talking about.
Yes, absolutely, Deepti. In fact, if you see Prime Minister's departure statement when he left for the three-nation visit, which included Canada as the second stop for the G7 summit, the last paragraph of that departure statement clearly mentions that these visits are also very closely linked to the issue of terrorism and the red line, as you're mentioning, India has drawn on that issue. It is important to take into loop as many countries for diplomatic reasons as possible. And in that context, in fact, the visit before Canada, the one to Cyprus, was very significant considering that Cyprus has ongoing disputes with Turkey, and Turkey had taken a stand which was pro-Pakistan. And therefore, the fact that India or Prime Minister Modi went to Cyprus, the first visit in 2 decades, only the third in since India became independent, were all also very significant. And clearly, the Prime Minister will use the G7 platform, not just the Prime Minister alone. The entire delegation will also significantly use the G7 platform to drive that message through in these pull-aside and bilateral meetings.
Absolutely. Mahar, stay with us. We're going to keep coming back to you as updates coming in. The pull-asides, that Deepthi was referring to, that's flashing on our screens, are underway, first with the Mexican president, then with the South Korean president. And Ambassador Srivastav, this is the big diplomatic power play of India that is on display here at the G7, something that we've been talking about, why India needs to be at the G7, because A, it's a big economic heavyweight that's driving the world economy, and B, this is also allowing India to be at the center stage of global politics, with the Prime Minister Modi pretty much at the center of it.
Indeed, G7 is important, and so is India. In fact, if you look at it in the larger perspective, India is the only major economy which has a GDP growth rate of 6.5%. None of the G7 countries can match that. Of course, the GDP of US and China and Japan is higher than us. But it is as much in their interest to engage with India. And Prime Minister has taken time off from his busy schedule to meet the G7 leaders and also other leaders who have been invited to the summit as part of the outreach, like you just mentioned, South Korea. These leaders have such a busy schedule that these multilateral events provide them with an opportunity to meet, which otherwise, the schedule would not permit.
Absolutely. With South Korea, there are also a lot of technology ties that are there. Semiconductor is a very important aspect of the India-South Korea relationship. That is likely to be a part of these conversations. Technology sharing, semiconductor being part of it. And also, let's not forget, South Korea also has deep linkages in the global supply chain. If India wants to be a player at that level, it needs to have linkages with countries like South Korea, and that, I think, is going to be some of the conversations dominating that polar sides. Deepthi.
Oh yes, Kathleen, we've been talking of a lot of other issues. Immigration is one issue that we keep going back to, keeping in mind that it does affect a lot of world capitals, and then you have Donald Trump at the center of that conversation, Kathleen. Considering what we are seeing the world moving towards, it is very, very fluid, and everyone obviously looking at their interest. Do you believe that could still drive a lot of this international conversation when you will have the world leaders sitting and talking?
Yes. I'll tell you one thing, because let's talk about Canada and US both. So when when all these clients used to come, the main goal was to get entry to the US in a cakewalk, right? They don't want to get through with big visas appointment wherein they have to wait for almost 3 to 6 months time to get their appointments. But here, when you apply for Canadian permanent residency based on your skill sets, your age, education, work experience, and language, of course, you also have the right to work and settle in the US. That was the one factor. And this was the reason people were really keen towards Canada. First, they had their own community there. Second was to get an entrance to the US. But now, after Donald Trump, what is happening. I don't want to, highlight it again. It is again gonna be a big issue, and I do think that they are going to discuss this for sure.
All right, slipping into a very short break. We come back on the other side, continue our rolling coverage of the G7 summit, 50th such summit taking place in Canada at a time when war clouds are hovering over the entire Middle East. Will that dominate the conversation, or will there be several other issues that the G7 summit would be able to achieve in the absence of Donald Trump? We come back and talk more on that. Stay with us.
Welcome back. This is a live rolling coverage of what the world today is closely watching. Right now, remember, there's an all-important G7 summit that is underway. We will have important bilaterals that get kick-started in the next few hours. And before that happens, Gauri, we've already spoken about the all-important pull asides that Prime Minister Modi has had, whether it is with Mexico or also with South Korea. But yes, keeping our eyes focused also on the other developing situation between Israel and Iran. Then you have Donald Trump, who's talking of a quote-unquote unconditional surrender. He decides to rush from this G7 summit earlier, only to be a part of this all-important meeting right now in the Situation Room in the White House. So a lot is happening, a lot is churning, and this is going to be a long, important night, Gauri. But what are we expecting as far as the G7 is concerned now?
Indeed, and whatever decision that the Trump administration takes will actually have a huge bearing, a direct bearing on how the G7 evaluates Israel-Iran conflict. They may not come out with a formal communique. Donald Trump has said that he's not going to sign one, so there's not going to be any formal statement that will come out at the end of the leaders' discussion. But any clear messaging would be extremely important depending on what the Trump administration's view is. So what the G7 is likely to do, they've already come out with a statement earlier because Trump left early. So they came out with a statement earlier where they backed Israel and said that Iran is the reason why tensions took place and escalated in the entire region. So that has already happened. In terms of specifics, I believe two important meetings for India would be very significant. One with the Prime Minister Mark Carney. We've spoken about it, and second could be also very important would be the first visit that will take place between German Chancellor and Prime Minister Modi. This is the first meeting of the two leaders, and will set the stage, Deepti, in terms of how both leaders now view the relationship, which has just completed 25 years actually. So the next 25 years vision roadmap, the two will probably identify together.
And I'm just taking a cue from what Gauri just spoke about Germany. And I do recall here on NDTV, we'd really gone big with that entire coverage when you had exposed the hypocrisy of the West when it comes to terror, when it comes to terror that emanates from Pakistan. But world across, you've only seen condemnation. But Germany again was one of those big powers that had come and spoken in favor of the right of defense of India. So I think it's important because New Delhi remembers which really are these players that have continuously stood by us in this fight against terror. The Prime Minister does speak about Operation Sindoor. He does say it is important for the world to know that why did we cross those red lines with Pakistan. And that is why, Gauri, you've seen that big diplomatic outreach vis-a-vis India, sending out our leaders, sending out our diplomats, our people to 33 world capitals.
Indeed.
To actually expose Pakistan, its terror factories, and also call out the hypocrisy of a lot of these powers.
Absolutely. And Ambassador Srivastav, that is likely to be a very important part of some of these pull asides as well. The Operation Sindoor, India's position when it comes to Pak-backed, Pak-sponsored terrorism, all that is likely to be a very key part of the pull-aside conversations that are going to take place today, and some are already in fact underway as we speak.
Yes, indeed, it will. It's not part of the G7 agenda. But of course, in bilateral conversations, this will come up. And as you mentioned, Germany showed a lot of understanding. Germany is the biggest economy within Europe.
We'll connect that line with Ambassador Srivastav in just a bit. And the G7 family photo is also going to take place very shortly. The official welcome is underway of the leaders. This is this visit of the Prime Minister in Canada after a decade. The G7 summit is coming in. Okay, all right. Those are live visuals coming in of Prime Minister Modi being officially welcomed by Prime Minister Mark Carney. There you can see live visuals of PM Modi being welcomed by Mark Carney at the G7 summit. It's a very important meeting that will take place between the two leaders very shortly. The first meeting, Deepti, of the two leaders. They're meeting for the very first time and hoping to really start a new chapter in India-Canada relations from here on.
Oh yes, and I think this is significant for a lot of ways. When you look at Canada, you talk of India, again, you have this huge relationship, but a relationship that has seen a lot of ups and downs. But you've seen India, Gauri, I must say this, standing its ground, no matter what, no matter whatever the pressure. The fact is that we told Canada unequivocally that these are lines that you need to respect, and if you don't, we don't stand with you anymore.
Absolutely, and India was very firm and remains so, that as far as Khalistani separatists that continue on Canadian soil, that is unacceptable to India. and New Delhi has said so in so many words to Ottawa. Very harsh, important and significant diplomatic steps were taken by India in the wake of how the Khalistani separatists and terrorists hijacked the India-Canada relationship. All that is expected could be repaired under Carney's leadership, simply because he is a pragmatic leader. He may be a political newcomer, but he is not new to how world finance works, world politics works, and he understands the relevance of New Delhi in Canada's scheme of things. And Deepthi, he actually said that in so many words, that for Canada to grow, Canada's economy to grow, it needs an economic engine like India.
Oh yes, so India has been speaking about the global south. India has been trying to assert that this is a world where you need to have shared priorities and you need to work together and keep everyone's interest in mind. I think we can also touch base with our colleague Ghazali, who's also joining us live right now. Ghazali, these are important pictures, important, powerful pictures that we are looking at, and this is just the beginning, I think, of a lot more that will come. And India, as always, is going to be driving this conversation, keeping in mind that there are shared interests that we are talking about.
Yeah, certainly. And this is not just a new initiative, because you see, wherever there has been change in presidency or wherever there has been change in government, like what we saw in Maldives, Mr. Moizu, just to draw the parallel, he was the person who was very critical of India during his presidential campaign. But when he came to power, he was the first one to be invited, one among the first one to be invited for Prime Minister's swearing-in ceremony last year. In the same way here in Canada, it all appeared as if under Mr. Trudeau's tenure, India-Canada relations had taken a hit. Multiple accusations were made by the Canadian government back then. A similar set of officials is still are there in Canada, and yet for the G7, even Prime Minister Modi has been invited, and bilateral meetings are expected between Mr. Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister now. So certainly it's a reset button has been clicked by India and Canada both, and in the coming days we will see intelligence sharing on terrorism and multiple more MOUs and understandings between the two countries growing together, because India has always had this kind of relations or diplomatic or the foreign policies like this, that we are not discarding anyone. We are always embracing as a voice of the global South. India has always been open to new ideas, new relations, and that is why it looks very promising. These pictures are very promising. The Prime Minister is meeting the Canadian Prime Minister, and the bilateral meetings are expected to happen soon.
Pictures looking at the kind of potential that the relationship offers. Already intel sharing mechanisms are being talked about, Ghazali, between India and Canada, and there's expectation that trade will be the first shared interest that will pave the way for the relationship to really recover from Justin Trudeau's lows.
Yeah, certainly. And see how we had pulled out our diplomatic missions and our diplomats from Canada, how Canada had withdrawn, or we had asked Canada also to remove their senior officials from here. And this went on for a couple of months. And after that, there was a lull. There was no diplomatic activity between India and Canada, but India was waiting that the moment there is a new government there is the new face in the leadership in Canada, things were moving in the back channel. And that is why just a couple of months ago, we had this meeting of Intel chiefs from across the world. And even then, Mr. Ajit Doval, the NSA, India's NSA, and his counterpart from Canada, they all met there, and it started moving. It appeared now that India and Canada have gone to reset their relations, and very soon this meeting is certainly an indicator that India and Canada are now going to reset the relationship, be it with trade, technology, security, like any other country with which India has good relations. Canada being part of G7 is certainly very significant to have them on our side, and also, as you rightly pointed out, when it comes to intelligence sharing, to counter a mechanism to counter terrorism and all, that will be very significant, and we will see some concrete steps between the two countries to curb on these extremism or those voices who are critical of India, those voices who are anti-nationals, and how Canada had become a safe haven for all those who had committed crime, were involved in terror activities in India, those who were fomenting trouble here in India, but were very safe there in Canada, were given safe shelter in Canada. Perhaps on that front as well, we will see some concrete action after this meeting gets over. In the days to come, India and Canada will certainly look to resolve or to solve that particular problem first.
Absolutely. And I think Ghazali and Gauri, these are pictures that the diaspora will also be looking at very, very closely. When it comes to Canada, the diaspora is huge. And Ghazali, all of us know that when this entire episode was going on, I think we can also cut across to Maha, who has a quick update for us. Maha?
The handshake has taken place. That program was delayed by a bit. It was supposed to happen earlier, but because of some scheduling issues, the previous programs were on. The host, Prime Minister Mark Carney, was available for handshakes and pictures with the invited countries only now. And the big moment there, considering that there was friction for 2 years between India and Canada, to see those visuals will come as a big relief to many people, especially the community, the Indian community in Canada, that has been feeling the pressure of the diplomatic friction between the two countries. And they have been keenly looking forward to this time because they believe that only once the two sides sit down and talk to each other will they be able to look at the differences and work on solutions towards them. So this is certainly a very significant photo op because it is going to lead to a meeting later in the day between the two leaders, and all eyes keenly trained on that meeting as to what will emerge from that bilateral meeting. There could be some at least understanding on a law enforcement mechanism or some sort of intelligence sharing with regards to crime syndicates. At least that's what we've been hearing. But the very fact that the two leaders are standing there today, shaking hands, smiling at each other, is giving a good signal.
Absolutely, indeed it is. Maha, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks much for joining us. On your screens, viewers, are those visuals that indicate a reset, a reboot, a fresh start to the India-Canada relationship, which suffered during Justin Trudeau's tenure, and the two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Carney, meeting for the first time, hoping for a fresh start to the relationship. With that, we come to an end, viewers, of this very special broadcast of the G7 Summit in Canada. And Deepthi and I will keep getting updates as and when we get off the summit that continues and is underway.
Thank you so much for watching. Good night.